again. They had taken seats in the back of the ballroom, trying to be inconspicuous, but Jack could feel their presence like a magnetic pull. Sarah was talking quietly to Ethan, who was swinging his legs from the chair that was too big for him, his eyes still fixed on Jack with that intense curiosity. The wedding coordinator appeared at Jack's side again, this time with barely concealed panic. "Mr. Thompson, we really need to start. The musicians are ready, the photographer is in position, and your guests are getting restless." Jack nodded absently, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the 6 years he had missed. Ethan's first steps, his first words, his first day of school. All the moments that make up a childhood, all the memories that create the bond between a father and son. Jack had chosen his empire over all of that, and now he was being asked to choose again. The string quartet began playing the processional music, and the wedding guests rose to their feet, turning toward the back of the ballroom where Emily would make her entrance. Jack took his position at the altar, his hands trembling slightly as he straightened his tie. Emily appeared at the entrance, radiant in her designer gown, her father's arm linked through hers. She began walking down the aisle, her smile bright and confident, every step bringing her closer to the life Jack had planned for them both. But as she walked, Jack's eyes kept drifting to the back of the room, where Sarah sat with their son. Ethan was watching the ceremony with wide eyes, probably wondering why his father was marrying someone else when he had just learned that his dad existed. Sarah's expression was carefully neutral, but Jack could see the pain she was trying to hide. Emily reached the altar, and her father placed her hand in Jack's. The minister began speaking, his words about love and commitment and lifelong partnership echoing through the ballroom. Jack tried to focus on the ceremony, tried to push away the image of Ethan's face, but it was impossible. "Do you, Jack Thompson, take Emily Richardson to be your lawfully wedded wife?" the minister asked. Jack opened his mouth to say the words that would seal his fate, that would complete the life he had built for himself. But instead of "I do," what came out was something entirely different. "I can't do this." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Emily's eyes went wide with shock and confusion. The minister looked like he had been slapped. But Jack felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Relief. Pure, overwhelming relief. "I'm sorry," Jack said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "I'm so sorry, Emily. You deserve someone who loves you completely, and I'm not that person." He turned to face the crowd, his eyes finding Sarah and Ethan in the back row. "I have a son," he announced, his voice carrying across the stunned silence. "I have a son, and I've already missed 6 years of his life. I won't miss another day." The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests began talking all at once, their voices rising in shock and confusion. Emily's mother stood up, her face red with embarrassment and anger. The wedding photographer kept snapping pictures, probably thinking this would make great tabloid material. But Jack ignored all of it. He walked down the aisle, still wearing his tuxedo, past the shocked faces of everyone who had thought they knew him. He walked straight to Sarah and Ethan, who were both staring at him with expressions of surprise and hope. "I made a mistake," Jack said, kneeling down so he was at eye level with Ethan. 7 years ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life. I chose work over love, success over family. I lost your mother, and I lost the chance to know you. But if you'll let me, I'd like to try to make up for that." Ethan looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Then he looked back at Jack, studying his face with the serious expression that seemed to be his default. "Are you going to leave again?" Ethan asked quietly. The question cut straight to Jack's heart. This 6-year-old boy, who barely knew him, had already learned that adults sometimes made promises they couldn't keep. He had inherited his father's caution along with his eyes. "No," Jack said, and for the first time in years, he meant something with every fiber of his being. "I'm never leaving again." Behind them, the chaos of the ruined wedding continued. Emily was crying, her perfect makeup running down her cheeks. Guests were gathering their things and heading for the exits, already crafting the story they would tell about the wedding that wasn't. Jack's business associates were probably calculating how this would affect their deals with him. But Jack didn't care about any of that. For the first time in his adult life, he was exactly where he belonged. The coffee shop where they went after the wedding disaster was nothing like the restaurants Jack usually frequented. It had mismatched chairs, scratched wooden tables, and a menu written in chalk on a blackboard behind the counter. Jack had loosened his tie and rolled up his sleeves, but he still looked completely out of place in his expensive tuxedo. Ethan sat across from him, carefully stirring chocolate milk with a spoon that was too big for his small hands. He had been quiet since they left the hotel, processing everything that had happened with the serious concentration that seemed to be his way of dealing with the world. Sarah sat beside Ethan, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. She looked tired, like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for a long time and wasn't sure if she was ready to set it down. "I need to know," Jack said quietly, "why you came today." "Why now?" Sarah looked at Ethan, then back at Jack. "Because he's been asking questions. About his father, about why he doesn't have a dad like his friends at school. I've been telling him that his father was a good man who had to go away, but kids aren't stupid. They want real answers." Jack felt a stab of pain at the thought of Ethan wondering about him, creating stories to fill the void where a father should have been. "What did you tell him about me?" "The truth," Sarah said simply. "That you were someone I loved very much, but that you had dreams that took you away from us. I never wanted him to think he wasn't wanted." But Jack could see in Ethan's eyes that no matter what Sarah had told him, the boy had still internalized the absence. Still wondered if there was something wrong with him that made his father leave. "I didn't know," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "Sarah, I swear to you, I didn't know you were pregnant. If I had known, would it have changed anything?" Sarah asked, and there was no accusation in her voice, just genuine curiosity. "Would you have stayed if you had known about the baby?" Jack opened his mouth to say yes immediately, but then he stopped. Sarah deserved honesty, and the truth was more complicated than a simple yes or no. "I don't know," he admitted. "I was so focused on building my career, on proving I could be successful. I might have tried to convince myself that leaving was still the right thing to do, that I could provide better for you and the baby by becoming successful first." Sarah nodded, as if she had expected that answer. "That's why I didn't tell you. I knew you were struggling with the choice between your career and our relationship. I didn't want to trap you with a pregnancy, and I didn't want you to stay out of obligation instead of love." "But I loved you," Jack said, his voice breaking slightly. "I loved you so much it scared me. I thought if I chose you over my career, I'd end up like my father, unable to provide for my family, and then I'd leave anyway." "Your father left because he was weak," Sarah said gently. "Not because he was poor. There's a difference." Jack looked at Ethan, who was listening to every word with the intensity of a child trying to understand the adult world. "I've spent 7 years building an empire," Jack said. "I have more money than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. I have influence, power, respect. And sitting here with you too, I realize none of it means anything if I don't have a family to share it with." "Money can't buy back 6 years," Sarah said quietly. "And it can't fix trust that's been broken." "I know," Jack said. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to give me a chance to earn it." Ethan looked up from his chocolate milk. "What does that mean?" Jack turned to face his son, this little boy who had inherited his stubborn chin and his green eyes, but thankfully seemed to have his mother's gentle heart. "It means I want to be your dad. Really be your dad. Not just the guy who shows up sometimes with expensive presents, but the person who helps you with your homework and teaches you to ride a bike and comes to your soccer games." "I don't play soccer yet," Ethan said seriously. "But I want to learn." "Then I'll teach you," Jack said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. Sarah held up a hand. "Hold on. This isn't going to be that simple. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect everything to be perfect. Ethan and I have a routine, a life. We've learned to depend on each other, and we're not going to change that overnight." Jack nodded, understanding that Sarah was protecting both herself and Ethan from the possibility of being hurt again. "What do you want from me?" "Consistency," Sarah said immediately. "If you're going to be in his life, you need to be really in his life. Not just when it's convenient for you, or when you're feeling guilty. Every week, every month, every year. Can you promise me that?" Jack thought about his businesses, his deals, his busy schedule that was booked solid for the next 6 months. Then he thought about missing Ethan's 7th birthday, his first school play, his first heartbreak. "I can promise you that," he said. "I'll make time. And you need to understand that this isn't about getting back together," Sarah continued. "Too much has happened. Too much time has passed. I care about you, Jack, but I'm not the same person I was 7 years ago, and neither are you. We need to figure out how to be good parents together without trying to recapture something that's gone." The word stung, but Jack knew she was right. He had walked away from their relationship, and he couldn't expect to just pick up where they had left off. "I understand," he said. "I just want to be part of his life. And yours as a friend." Sarah studied his face for a long moment, as if she was trying to read his soul. "We'll start slow," she said finally. "Maybe you can take him to the park this weekend. See how it goes." Ethan looked excited for the first time since they had sat down. "Can we get ice cream?" Jack laughed, and it felt like the first genuine laugh he had had in years. "We can get all the ice cream you want. But not too much," Sarah added with a small smile. "He gets hyper." The next few weeks were unlike anything Jack had ever experienced. He had conquered boardrooms and negotiated million-dollar deals, but trying to connect with a 6-year-old boy was the most challenging thing he had ever attempted. Their first outing to the park was awkward. Ethan was polite but distant, clearly unsure how to act around this stranger who claimed to be his father. Jack pushed him on the swings and helped him across the monkey bars, but every interaction felt forced, like they were both trying too hard. It was during their third visit that something shifted. Ethan had been trying to climb a particularly tall slide, but he was too short to reach the first rung. Jack had been standing back, not wanting to be too pushy, when Ethan turned to him with frustration in his eyes. "Can you help me?" Ethan asked, and something in his voice made Jack's heart skip. Jack lifted his son up to the first rung, then stayed close as Ethan climbed higher. When the boy reached the top, he turned around with the biggest smile Jack had ever seen. "I did it!" Ethan shouted, and Jack felt a pride that was deeper and more satisfying than any business success he had ever achieved. That night, when Jack dropped Ethan off at Sarah's apartment, the boy hugged him goodbye. It was a quick hug, over before Jack could fully process it, but it meant everything. "He's starting to trust you," Sarah said quietly as they watched Ethan run up the stairs to their apartment. "How can you tell?" Jack asked. "Because he asked me if you were coming to his school play next week," Sarah said. "And when I said I didn't know, he said he hoped you would." Jack felt tears prick his eyes. "I'll be there," he said. "Front row." Slowly, carefully, Jack began to build a relationship with his son. He learned that Ethan loved dinosaurs but was afraid of loud noises. He discovered that the boy was incredibly smart but struggled with reading because he was embarrassed to ask for help. Jack started coming over twice a week to help with homework, and he began to understand the daily challenges that Sarah had been facing alone. Sarah remained cautious but fair. She never badmouthed Jack in front of Ethan, and she included him in decisions about the boy's education and activities. But she also maintained clear boundaries, reminding Jack that he was a guest in their life, not the head of their household. It was during one of their homework sessions that Ethan asked the question Jack had been dreading. "Why did you leave my mom?" Ethan asked, not looking up from his math worksheet. Jack set down his pencil and thought carefully about how to answer. "I was scared," he said finally. "I thought I had to choose between taking care of you and your mom or following my dreams. I made the wrong choice." Ethan looked up at him with those serious green eyes. "Are you still scared?" "Every day," Jack admitted. "But now I'm more scared of losing you than I am of anything else." Ethan nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him. "My mom says being scared is okay as long as you do the right thing anyway." Jack smiled, feeling a rush of love for both his son and the woman who had raised him to be so wise. "Your mom is very smart." "I know," Ethan said matter-of-factly. "She's the best mom in the world." "You're right," Jack said. "And I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be the best dad I can be." Ethan smiled, and for the first time, Jack saw his own smile reflected in his son's face. "I think you're getting better at it," the boy said. It was the greatest compliment Jack had ever received. 2 years passed, and Jack's life transformed in ways he never could have imagined. The man who had once measured his worth in profit margins and stock prices now found himself celebrating things like Ethan's first A in reading and the wobbly tooth that finally fell out during a weekend camping trip. Jack had restructured his entire business empire to make room for what really mattered. He promoted trusted managers to handle the day-to-day operations, turned down deals that would require extensive travel, and established a strict rule that family time was sacred. His business associates, thought he had lost his mind. His bank account disagreed. Ethan had grown taller and more confident, but he still had that serious way of looking at the world that reminded Jack of himself as a child. The boy had started calling him Dad about 6 months earlier, and Jack still felt a thrill every time he heard it. Sarah had slowly begun to let her guard down, allowing Jack to become a real co-parent rather than just a weekend visitor. They had developed an easy rhythm of shared school pickups, coordinated birthday parties, and quiet conversations about Ethan's needs and dreams. But Jack knew that something was still missing. Sarah was kind to him, friendly even, but there was a wall between them that he wasn't sure would ever come down. She had built a life without him, and while she was willing to let him be part of Ethan's world, she seemed determined to keep her own heart protected. The breakthrough came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in October. Jack had picked Ethan up from school and brought him back to Sarah's apartment for homework time. Sarah was grading papers at the kitchen table while Jack helped Ethan with a challenging math problem. "I don't get it," Ethan said, his voice tight with frustration. "Why do I have to learn this stuff anyway?" "Because education is important," Jack said automatically, then caught himself. "But you want to know the real reason?" Ethan nodded, his green eyes focused intently on his father's face. "Because learning hard things teaches you that you can figure out anything if you try hard enough," Jack said. "And that confidence will help you with everything else in life." "Did you have to learn hard things when you were a kid?" Ethan asked. Jack glanced at Sarah, who had stopped grading and was listening to their conversation. "I had to learn that being poor didn't mean I was worth less than other people," Jack said. "And I had to learn that success isn't just about money." "What is it about then?" Ethan asked. Jack looked around the small, cozy apartment. Sarah's teaching certificates hung on the wall next to Ethan's artwork. The couch was covered with a throw blanket that Sarah had made herself, and the bookshelf was filled with well-worn novels and Ethan's collection of dinosaur encyclopedias. It wasn't fancy, but it was filled with love. "Success is about being surrounded by people who matter to you," Jack said. "It's about knowing that even when you mess up, they'll still be there. It's about having someone to celebrate with when good things happen and someone to comfort you when they don't." Ethan considered this seriously. "Like a family?" "Exactly like a family," Jack said. "Do we have that?" Ethan asked. "A real family?" Jack's throat tightened. He looked at Sarah, who was watching them with an expression he couldn't quite read. "We're working on it," he said. Later that evening, after Ethan had gone to bed and Jack was getting ready to leave, Sarah stopped him at the door. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" "For what you said to him about success. About family." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "I've been so focused on protecting him from being hurt again that I forgot he needs to see what a healthy family looks like." Jack felt his heart speed up. "Sarah, I know I can't undo the past. I know I hurt you, and I know trust has to be earned. But I need you to know that losing you was the biggest mistake of my life. Not just because of Ethan, but because I loved you. I still love you." Sarah looked at him for a long moment, and Jack could see the internal struggle playing out in her eyes. "I loved you too," she said finally. "But love wasn't enough 7 years ago. What makes you think it would be enough now?" "Because I'm not the same person I was then," Jack said. "I know what matters now. I know that all the money in the world can't buy what I have with you and Ethan. I know that success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with." "People change," Sarah said. "But what happens when the novelty wears off? When being a dad becomes routine instead of exciting? When you get bored with our quiet life and start missing the excitement of your old world?" Jack stepped closer to her, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. "Then I'll remember what it felt like to live without you for 7 years. I'll remember what it felt like to have everything I thought I wanted and still feel empty inside. And I'll know that I'm exactly where I belong." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I'm scared, Jack. I'm scared of believing you and being wrong. I'm scared of letting Ethan get too attached to the idea of us being a real family and then having it fall apart." "I'm scared too," Jack admitted. "But I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been." Sarah reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines that hadn't been there 7 years ago. "We'd have to take it slow," she said. "Really slow. For Ethan's sake." Jack's heart soared. "As slow as you want." And you'd have to understand that I'm not the same person I was before. I'm stronger now, more independent. I won't just go along with whatever you decide. I wouldn't want you to, Jack said. I fell in love with your strength, remember? Sarah smiled, and it was the first real smile she had given him since the day she walked into his wedding. I remember. They were married 8 months later, in a small ceremony in Sarah's childhood church. Ethan was the ring bearer, wearing a miniature version of Jack's suit and grinning from ear to ear. Sarah wore a simple white dress and carried wildflowers from her mother's garden. There were no photographers, no society pages, no guest list full of business contacts. But as Jack looked out at the faces of the people who mattered most to him, he knew he had never been richer. Their honeymoon was a camping trip to Yellowstone, where they taught Ethan to fish and told ghost stories around the campfire. Jack had never been camping before, but watching his son's face light up when they spotted a family of elk made him understand that the best adventures weren't about exotic locations or expensive hotels. They were about being together. Now, 5 years later, Jack's definition of success had completely changed. Success was Ethan running into his arms after school, excited to tell him about his day. Success was Sarah falling asleep with her head on his shoulder while they watched movies on their old couch. Success was the quiet moments between the chaos, the ordinary Tuesday evenings that felt like miracles. Jack still ran his businesses, but they no longer defined him. He had learned to delegate, to trust others, to understand that the world wouldn't end if he missed a meeting to attend Ethan's baseball game. His bank account was smaller than it had been at the height of his empire-building days, but his life was infinitely richer. The love he had never received as a child, the love he had convinced himself he didn't need, had finally found him. But more importantly, he had learned to give it freely, without conditions or expectations, without fear of losing control. Sometimes Jack thought about the man he used to be, the one who measured his worth in dollars and social status. That man had been successful by every conventional measure, but he had been completely alone. He had built an empire but had no one to share it with. He had achieved everything he thought he wanted and discovered it was nothing at all. The real folktale isn't about a man who found success and lost love. It's about a man who thought he had to choose between them and learned that true success is impossible without love. It's about understanding that the richest life isn't measured in what you accumulate, but in what you're willing to give up for the people who matter most. Jack's story reminds us that it's never too late to change course, never too late to choose what really matters, and never too late to discover that the love we think we can live without is actually the only thing that makes life worth living. Hit that subscribe button if the story reminded you what truly matters in life.